up and give direction on what happens. While that is in order, and I'll be making a comment on the same, especially on the language that is used in the recommendations part of the report, Mr. Speaker, allow me to first just establish, and perhaps this is something that the committee would rather inform us better, because when you title the committee that it is more than 95 deaths in Shakahola, it's quite interesting because when we went out as a house and said we need a committee to inform us on exactly the number of people that died, it is my expectation, Mr. Speaker, unless I haven't been able to capture it appropriately in the report, it's quite voluminous, and I began reading actually yesterday and have moved on quite well this afternoon on what is the exact number of Kenyans that we have lost, Mr. Speaker, because it doesn't come out explicitly in the report on their findings, perhaps an estimate whether there are more to be discovered that are still buried. Remember, there was that exhumation exercise that was ongoing in this particular part of the country. Mr. Speaker, this is something that is good for the history books. You know, Mr. Speaker, Kenya is still a young republic. And many of the times that we do work and don't know that years down the line, in another 50 or 100 years, Mr. Speaker, there will be members of parliament, members of Senate, who will refer to such reports. And perhaps might not be anybody alive to bring to the facts to fore, like a report of a committee of parliament can do. And therefore, they'll be relying on such reports, such as the one that we adopted in this House, Mr. Speaker, to get the accuracy of the happenings in this particular day and age. Therefore, I'd wish to urge colleagues that when we retreat to such particular instances, let us do this job the same way, and this is not particularly specifically with specific reference to this committee, but to all of us as members of parliament, to know that when we generate such reports, there'll be people 100 years down the line who will know that there was a senator called Danson Mungatana. He represented the people of Tana River in the Senate in the 13th Parliament. One time he chaired an ad hoc committee, and they looked into the proliferation of such cultic behaviors and so on and so forth. And they wish to draw reference at that particular time. People will want to understand why certain laws are the way they are, why the country behaves in a particular way. These are the documents that we'll be referring upon, Mr. Speaker. And it is my hope, by the time I left, Mr. Speaker, PSC at the end of last term, we were actually in the process of acquiring a digital record, and it's good that I say this when Commissioner Mogeni is here. And I hope that you conclude on that particular process. You know, many members of parliament don't know actually where the parliamentary library is. It is somewhere hidden in a building called County Hall and in the basement. There are many members who have never showed up that particular place. And it will be important that we establish mechanism through which we file such reports, so that it's not just on pen and paper and in computers. It will be important for people to search on 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 or even more years later and establish what this House and this committee said. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the first thing that I wish to appreciate about this committee is that it pointed out a glaring gap. And I agree with those that are saying it is insanity, as we have been informed elsewhere, to do the same thing over and over and expecting different results each time. I don't mind being informed by the chair of the committee, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Chair Mungatana.
Speaker, I have a great respect for my majority leader, and it is not in my habit to interrupt debate, but I just wanted to inform him in terms of the exact numbers. There were 428 deaths, and it's contained in the report. He has graciously explained that he has not maybe reached that chapter. But we have actually set out the comparison, the bomb blast, the people who died, the people who were killed in various tragedies in this country. And we have said that this was the biggest by far. So my majority, that information is actually there. Don't worry, we did a good job. Thank you.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's very useful information from the committee chair. And that's why it's important to have the committee chair listen in when members are debating their report so that they can shape and guide us when we miss. And I like the fact that he has reminded us as a parliament and even as a country that of all tragedies that you can think of that have befallen this nation, there is nothing that compares to this Shakahola madness. And it bothers me deep down to my heart that this matter, the minute it got out of media attention, actually, and the court battles that we continue to see with Mackenzie, it appears to be a matter that we have quickly swept under the carpet. That one individual can begin an exercise that leads to the death of over 400 countrymen. And it doesn't shock us, and we don't have a full-time schedule of punishment to those that in one way or the other, by commission or omission, participated in this exercise reaching the grave nature that it reached, Mr. Speaker, is something that should trouble all of us as leaders. Because believe you me, from all these 428 deaths that you have referred to, Senator Mungatana, I believe, and I know, I have seen actually, that most of them came from the far-flung corners of this part of this country. It could be somebody from Kisii, from Kericho, from I don't know where, whichever part, even as far as Turkana and Kakamega, the way Senator Boni was talking earlier on, Mr. Speaker. So think about it, good people. If you imagine the 1998 bomb blast, we know what has been done, how it's been recorded, how the perpetrators, some of them were found, others were not, because these were acts of terrorism. You can think about any other tragedy. You know, the ferry that sank, I think, in the early 90s, Mr. Speaker, and so many other things, tragedies that have befallen this nation. But like the chair is pointing us to this morning, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that there is no other tragedy that has befallen this nation, such as this particular incident, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I'd wish to point out that if you read the recommendations, and this is where, Senator Mungatana, I beg now that you listen to me the way I equally listen to you. If you read our Constitution, and allow me to paraphrase, Article 94, subsection 5, gives us enormous power as Parliament. And to quote verbatim, it says, no person or body other than Parliament, Parliament is us and the Assembly, has the power to make provision having the force of law in Kenya, except under the authority conferred by this Constitution or by legislation, because we create other statutory bodies that then make regulations and so on and so forth. But there's something that is being reminded to us as a House, that each time we sit to consider matters and we make decisions by way of resolution or whatever way, that we are the only institution that can make, provisions that have the force of law. And therefore, even a committee report, when we make recommendations, we should make it fully aware, knowing that whatever decision we reach as a House, for example, once we conclude debate on this particular report, Mr. Speaker, it is expected that that is the resolution of the people of Kenya through the representatives. And therefore, when we make recommendations, they should have the full force of law. And I say that, Mr. Speaker, because I have taken time to read, and perhaps this is more on the Secretariat, but also new members, because as members of committee, you are not illiterate people. You are literate and fully aware of what each English word means. I don't appreciate the fact that the language of our reports, not just this particular one, but many of our reports continues to be the committee recommends, the committee did this. That is very pale and opaque. We are the only institution that can make provision with the force of law. It is my sincere hope, and I hope Secretariat is listening, I hope members are equally listening, that each time now we begin to bring committee reports to this House, we shall have more far-reaching recommendations that are brought before the House, such that you make a decision and say the Senate or this committee instructs the Director of Criminal criminal investigations to do the following. This business of recommending, you know, when you recommend to somebody, they can choose to ignore you, your recommendation. And therefore, I don't appreciate this language that our committees continue to use in our reports about, you know, if you read, and they are very well elaborate recommendations. If you read the name of the officers, for example, who looked the other way, because there's clear acts of omission on the part of the county security team in Kilifi. And all those officers are listed. But then what is the recommendation of a committee? We recommend to the, let me get even that particular part, and I just read it because I had marked it out and said, this is something, you know, that the committee recommends. Yeah, here I got it. The National Police Service Commission should severely sanction security officers whose acts of commission or omission aided or abetted the Shakahola tragedy within 30 days of adoption of this report by the Senate. This shall include, and they are listed, you know, should severely sanction, and the following are listed: Joseph Kemboi, Charles Kamau Wahungu, Solomon Odera, Agbaso Guracha, and so on and so forth. About 11 officers that participated. But I don't appreciate the fact that we appear to be giving suggestions. It should be, Senator Mungatana, you guys carried out an investigation. You have established for us in the report. Anybody reading this report appreciates that actually what you guys are saying is true, that there was an act of omission on the part of these particular officers. I don't see a reason why, as a House of Parliament, we cannot make the necessary final recommendation, despite the fact that as Parliament we may not have the powers to prosecute. This should be a matter that you should conclude on it, send the file directly to Director of Public Prosecution. If there are any further details that need to be tied down, that is their business. But it is my belief that as Parliament we need to. Because when you say National Police Service to sanction, yet earlier in the report, Senator Mungatana, you have showed us that many of these officers, the only punishment is being given to them is a transfer. That is what I want us to reflect on deeply and think about it as Parliament each time we make these recommendations. Because there is no institution, good people, good senators, listening to me this morning, there is no institution in this country, not even cabinet, has the power that us as legislators we have. Each time we deal with matters as serious as this, let us interact and think about it. The same can be said about what has been recommended to the DCI, you know, that you investigate. It should start and read. It is the finding of this committee that this, and this, the necessary, then we direct the necessary institutions to do whatever is needed. I think I have made myself clear on that particular point, Mr. Speaker, and I have said, the reason I say this is because this is a work of a secretariat, because I've been in Parliament long enough to know how committee reports are done. It's generated by the secretariat, they do the typing, but even us as members, we cannot absolve ourselves of the blame, because we come and sit down and read through. Many times when I sat down in committees and served as a committee member, Mr. Speaker, I'd correct and say, please remove this, change from this language to the other. There is a presence of mind that is needed on us as members as well, that we need to appreciate when we are looking into these operations. I like the fact also, Mr. Speaker, just as a way of conclusion, that this committee is recommending a relook into this law. Actually, it's a 1968 law that governs the registration of societies, and they are guiding us on what we need to do. Because, let's face it, members, so long as we continue to register churches and religious organizations under societies, there is very little that you can do to Mackenzie's and the rest of this world, the rest of people that behave in that particular way. We must set up the office of a registrar of religious organizations, somebody properly trained in the field of religion. And there are people, we are not short of men and women in this country who have the competence, because, and we have the legal backing. We cannot say and fold our hands and sit down pretty on our laurels and say, oh, you know, religious is a sensitive topic. You cannot direct people on what to do. See what that lie says. Free looking at things has led us to as a country, where we are being told close to 500 Kenyans have died. It will be a dereliction of duty if after the passage of this committee and at the end of our term as a House, we will not have had a relook of this law. In fact, Senator Mungatana, as part of the exit nature of the work of this report, I want to believe that when you finally sit down as a committee to conclude on this work, please draft the amendment to this Societies Act and bring it for us to consider. Set up this particular office. Nothing stops you from doing that actually, so that we can give direction to the people of Kenya and they know that there are experts who can guide people, who can listen and say, if you want to set up, a Muslim religious institution, these are the standards that we shall accept of you, so that we even stop this issue, because you've captured it in your report about cells that are being set up, and many people imagine or believe that these are the places where young people are being trained about terrorism activities.
Leader, I can see Senator Mugatana is on a point of
Yes, no problem.
Yes, again, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to inform my very good majority leader that in fact, Mr. Speaker, we have gone ahead not just to bring an amendment, but to propose a whole new legislation, which we have attached to this report, Mr. Speaker. And that legislation seeks to balance between the constitutional freedom of worship and public sector concerns, safety concerns. So, Mr. Speaker, I want my majority leader to rest assured that we are on course, we are thinking on the same direction. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Mugatana. Please bring that bill. We prioritize it because this is a very, very grave matter. It's not something. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I remember, it's just, and perhaps this is something that we may need to think about later. There are so many, what is this gentleman called, Mackenzies, that continue to ply their trade across this country. In fact, I remember bumping into your committee at Kisumu Airport, Senator Mugatana, one evening. And I think it was, I don't know if it was Senator Hamida or who, Shakila, who informed me that you guys had come from a gentleman who calls himself somewhere in Vihiga, John Pesa, in Kisumu, and you narrated the very grave sins that you guys had worked. In fact, I could tell that the senators that had gone on that particular trip were actually disturbed deep down to their hearts, because you could see the things that they have seen. Men and women who've been tied down. Some of them haven't fed for days. Some of them have lost their sense of consciences. So it tells you that there are so many such Mackenzies that are out there in our various counties, Mr. Speaker. And as a House, even as we conclude on this particular report and the resolutions that have been so ably captured, even after doing that legislation that Senator Mugatana has promised us that we shall do, perhaps part of the powers that we must give to that office that we set up, Mugatana, is to initiate closure and perhaps prosecution of people who continue to do those kind of practices. Because while seated at Kisumu Airport, we were actually informed that that gentleman, Pesa, or I don't know what his full name is, John Pesa, has been in this practice for over 30 years. And people know, and people have come to accept as if it's just a normal practice. And we know so many others. We watch videos nowadays, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Senator Mugatana, part of the other problem are these frequency licenses that we to this to illegal and above because now the perhaps he will number that he reached out those on the radios. That's why many people confused and they believe that by the time you see somebody coming to the television and is able to explain things that this is somebody who is properly checked, and they imagine that we are such a civilized nation that there are systems that check such practices. That is something that we must equally address. Abuse of frequency. Public frequency, Mr. Speaker, are national assets that we shouldn't be dishing out to criminals. Because if you're giving it to Mackenzie to use to abuse our people and mislead them and kill them, believe you me, even terrorist organizations and communications authority must be put on notice on checking what is it that the people that have been given frequencies to run radio and TV stations are using them to do. Because if Mackenzie could use this frequency to mislead people and kill them, believe you me, even terrorists can get frequencies and use the same and run training, misinforming our young people and training them in a bad way and do greater harm to this country. Therefore, it is my submission before this House, Mr. Speaker, this morning as I come to conclude on this particular matter, that even the issue of frequencies and how they are used is something that we must have a look at, Mr. Speaker, so that if you're found to be using whatever frequency and bandwidths that have been allocated to you to mislead people or swindle people out of their hard-earned currency, we punish them. All is said and done, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the work of this particular committee. I celebrate. I was a bit concerned earlier in the session, Mr. Speaker, when the points of orders were raised, and Senator Boni Halwale, who today actually has again appreciated the work of this committee. And the only part I didn't agree with him is that he said some people are saying, he should have actually said, I was the one who raised that particular point of order and said, oh, these people had gone this way, and I thought about their conduct. But I believe in the conduct of the men and women who serve, our colleagues who serve on this particular committee and have given us such a wonderful report. I hope when we conclude on it, we shall follow up. I like that the annexure you attached, Senator Mungatana, has a days. In 30 days, this needs to be done. 30 days, this needs to be done. We've had this debate. I know I've said I'm concluding many times, but there are many things that keep coming to my mind. We have had this debate about implementation committee. And the argument of those of us that agreed with the dissolution of Senate's implementation committee is that we said it is the work of every committee to implement its own work. Therefore, you don't need one committee whose job is just to wait for others to do their work and follow through. Now, the question we must ask ourselves, Mr. Speaker, as I go to sit, is what about ad hoc committees? Who follows through with the implementation of ad hoc committees, Mr. Speaker? Because for the other committees, it's okay, and that argument holds, much as there are people who still strongly feel that we need to have a Senate implementation committee. But what about ad hoc committees? That is something that we need to resolve. With those many remarks, I support this report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you,
Mia
Linda.
mashirika ya kidini.
Ad hoc committees actually, they belong to liaison committee. They are born in the liaison committee. Liaison committee finances the ad hoc committees. So to make sure that the money given by liaison is properly utilized, they should report back to that committee, so that now we can know exactly the money we give them is doing the work. But like this one, I'm happy because members are appreciating your work. So at least to give you a clean bill of health. But you report back to us to the liaison at some point with a report. Who do you want to inform, Senator?
In line with the suggestion by the majority leader, maybe we could involve the different committees. For instance, recommendations that touch on security be referred to the National Security Committee. Legal recommendations be referred to the Legal and Human Rights Committee, and the rest will follow through. Just like we did with the dam report. Solar, yes. Thank you.
That is fair enough, but to satisfy liaison that you have concluded your work, we need the whole report from the committee, from the ad hoc, and then you can give recommendations to the various standing committees. Do you have a problem reporting to liaison? I'm with you also on the standing committees, the recommendations.
The committee was born in this House. Now that the report has been made to this House, the House may resolve now to take it back to liaison, and liaison will involve the different committees. I have no problem with your suggestion, Chairman.
Yes, Majority Leader.
I agree with what Senator Faki is saying. Maybe, and this is part of the improvement to the nature of how we do our reports, because I took some time to explain that particular point, is that in conclusion, because they have done a very good matrix, this needs to be done this number of days, you could include that particular comment now to cater for what Senator Faki is saying, that security and blah blah committee to monitor. So this and that committee to monitor. Thank you.
Also, maybe for future reference, our children and grandchildren, when they read this report, They will never tell where Senator Danson Buya Mungatana was serving. So the secretary also to note there is a senator for Tana River County. All these names are just blank. So that is my observation. I'm not debating, but it's an observation as the chair. So next is Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Wambua Enoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me to use part of my time to also comment on the issue raised by Senator Cheriot and Senator Faki. Mr. Speaker, you know, there is a reason why ad hoc committees are created. They are created on the understanding that the issues that they will be dealing with are too weighty and too involving for parent committees to be able to resolve the same issues within reasonable time. The Speaker, you protect me from the outgoing Speaker. Thank you, the Speaker. And so what am I saying about these ad hoc committees? The Speaker, if the committees are created to handle work that the House is convicted cannot be effectively handled by the parent committees, then it will be wrong then to create an avenue for ad hoc committees to also begin to generate work for the parent committees. Because where will we stop? It's a debate that we can have and
to follow up and give direction on what happens. While that is in order, and I'll be making a comment on the same, especially on the language that is used in the recommendations part of the report, Mr. Speaker, allow me to first just establish and perhaps this is something that the committee will rather inform us better, because when you title the committee that it is more than 95 deaths in Shakahola, it's quite interesting because when we went out as a house and said we need a committee to inform us on exactly the number of people that died, it is my expectation, Mr. Speaker, unless I haven't been able to capture it appropriately in the report, it's quite voluminous, and I began reading actually yesterday and have moved on quite well this afternoon on what is the exact number of Kenyans that we have lost, Mr. Speaker, because it doesn't come out explicitly in the report on their findings, perhaps an estimate whether there are more to be discovered that are still buried. Remember, there was that exhumation exercise that was ongoing in this particular part of the country. Mr. Speaker, this is something that is good for the history books. You know, Mr. Speaker, Kenya is still a young republic. And many of the times that we do work and don't know that years down the line, in another 50 or 100 years, Mr. Speaker, there will be members of parliament, members of Senate, who will refer to such reports. And there perhaps might not be anybody alive to bring to the facts to fore, like a report of a committee of parliament can do. And therefore, they'll be relying on such reports, such as the one that we adopted in this House, Mr. Speaker, to get the accuracy of the happenings in this particular day and age. Therefore, I'd wish to urge colleagues that when we retreat to such particular instances, let us do this job the same way, and this is not particularly specifically with specific reference to this committee, but to all of us as members of parliament, to know that when we generate such reports, there'll be people 100 years down the line who will know that there was a senator called Danson Mungatana. He represented the people of Tana River in the Senate in the 13th Parliament. One time he chaired an ad hoc committee, and they looked into the proliferation of such cultic behaviors and so on and so forth. And they wish to draw reference at that particular time. People will want to understand why certain laws are the way they are, why the country behaves in a particular way. These are the documents that we'll be referring upon, Mr. Speaker. And it is my hope, by the time I left, Mr. Speaker, PSC at the end of last term, we were actually in the process of acquiring a digital record, and it's good that I say this when Commissioner Mogeni is here. And I hope that you conclude on that particular process. You know, many members of parliament don't know actually where the parliamentary library is. It is somewhere hidden in a building called County Hall and in the basement. There are many members who have never showed up that particular place. And it will be important that we establish mechanism through which we file such reports so that it's not just on pen and paper and in computers. It will be important for people to search on 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 or even more years later and establish what this House and this committee said. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the first thing that I wish to appreciate about this committee is that it pointed out a glaring gap. And I agree with those that are saying it is insanity, as we have been informed elsewhere, to do the same thing over and over and expecting different results each time. I don't mind being informed by the chair of the committee, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Chair Mgatana.
Speaker, I have a great respect for my majority leader, and it is not in my habit to